Why did everyone go silent the moment she stepped into the room? Lyric Castellane felt the shift before she saw the faces. 31 years old, compact, steady, trained to read tension the way others read weather, she froze just inside the doorway of the Falcon Ridge briefing hall. The hum of conversation that had been alive seconds before flattened into something tight and careful. Not hostile, not welcoming, just avoiding. The kind of distance people kept when they thought they knew something they shouldn't say aloud. She moved anyway. She always moved anyway. The roster board glowed at the front of the room, her name there in clean block letters beside Apache 61, the flagship gunship for the exercise, the aircraft she had prepared months for, the bird she knew the way most people knew their own breathing. And yet not a single pilot standing near the board looked her way as she approached. They parted slightly, not enough to be rude, just enough to say without words, "We don't want to be seen with you right now." She pretended not to notice. Her eyes locked on the assignment: primary gunship demonstration sortie, Sentinel Forge, NATO brass, Pentagon analysts, live feeds, every maneuver judged. This was supposed to be her moment, not for glory, not for ego, but to prove something she'd quietly feared she was losing: the right to be exactly where she was standing. But then Major Bridger Talmadge appeared in the operations doorway, his shoulders squared, his jaw set. And he didn't look at her. Not fully. Not even for a second. "Captain Castellane," he said without emotion. She followed the command in his voice, stepping into the hallway. The door shut behind them with a soft, final click. "You're off the flight." He said it the way someone delivers a weather report. Plain, unrelenting, not open to debate. Lyric blinked once. On whose authority? "Colonel Kellerman. Orders came down an hour ago." She let the words settle, tasting the metallic edge of something she didn't want to name. "Who's taking it?" "Lieutenant Oakes." Sable Oakes. Half her flight hours. Never handled a demonstration on this scale. Never flown under this level of scrutiny. Lyric didn't say any of that. Her voice stayed level even as something inside her tightened. "Why?" Talmadge's jaw worked once before he replied. "I wasn't given a reason." But that wasn't true, not completely. She saw it in the way he couldn't meet her eyes. He knew something, or thought he did, or heard enough whispers to pretend he didn't. The briefing began 5 minutes later. Colonel Kellerman stood at the front, immaculate and unreadable, running through weather, visibility, radio protocol. He never looked at her until the flight assignments came up. A pause, barely a breath. "Change to the roster. Apache 61 will be flown by Lieutenant Oakes. Captain Castellane is reassigned to ground observation." 40 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Ground observation. The insult carried its own gravity. It wasn't punishment, it was dismissal. It was the military's polite way of saying, "We don't trust you with anything that matters." No explanation, no justification, just a gentle carving away of everything she'd built. She didn't ask questions, not because she didn't have them, but because she already knew what was coming. The whispers followed her into the hallway. "I heard she failed a psyche eval." "No, she refused orders in Qatar, serious ones." Command doesn't sideline someone like that without a reason. She kept walking, each step a small fight to keep her face neutral, her breath steady. Her throat felt tight. Her pulse thudded at her temples. But her posture never cracked, the curse of a soldier who had trained herself to remain upright even when she wanted to fold inward. The desert heat outside hit her like a wall. She let it burn, letting it distract from the sharper pain inside. The observation deck was already crowded. Someone thrust a pair of binoculars into her hands without so much as looking at her. She took them silently, moving toward the window that overlooked the flight line. Below, Sable Oak stood beside her Apache, Lyric's Apache, running through pre-flight checks. Slow, hesitant, checking the same panel twice, then 3 times, hands trembling slightly as she flipped through her checklist. Decker, the crew chief, stood nearby, unimpressed, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He kept glancing up toward the tower, toward Lyric, then toward Kellerman in the VIP section. Two senior officers whispered in the back corner. "This is a mistake," one said. "The mission will proceed as planned," the other replied. "Oaks isn't ready." "That's not for us to decide." Their conversation stopped dead the moment they noticed her listening, or maybe the moment they remembered she wasn't supposed to matter anymore. The radio crackled. "Tower, this is Apache 61, requesting clearance for engine start." Lyric lifted the binoculars. Hydraulic reservoir, she could see it from her angle, a slight shimmer on the outer casing, a pressure differential that shouldn't be there, a mistake, a simple, dangerous human mistake. Her hand hovered near the radio. If she reported it, it would look like she was undermining Sable. If she didn't report it, she lowered her hand. She would not be the one accused of sabotaging a mission. She wasn't even allowed to fly. But that was when she saw the black Suburban. It rolled through the main gate with a certainty that made the entire base shift. No one spoke. No one breathed. Vehicles didn't move like that unless they belonged to someone who outranked fear itself. The Suburban stopped just a few feet from the command tower. A man stepped out. Silver hair, steady posture, chest full of ribbons, 4 stars glinting in desert sunlight. Admiral Cohen Renfield. A name spoken on bases the way storms were spoken about, with awe and dread, and the understanding that once he arrived, something was going to change. Colonel Kellerman all but sprinted across the tarmac to meet him, saluted too fast, talked too fast, explained too fast. Renfield didn't move. He just listened, his hands clasped behind his back, expression calm in the way only dangerous men knew how to be calm. Then he spoke 5 quiet words. Words that hit Kellerman so hard the colonel's face drained of color. Renfield walked past him without another glance and stepped into the command tower. Every officer snapped to attention. Every conversation stopped. His eyes swept the room until they found her. "Captain Castelain," he said softly, "walk with me." She felt every stare burn into her back as she followed him onto the external platform. Heat radiated off the concrete. The airfield vibrated with anticipation. Renfield stood at the railing, silent, the kind of silence that tested someone's spine. Finally he asked, "Who grounded you?" "Major Talmadge, sir, on orders from Colonel Kellerman." "Did they give you a reason?" "No, sir." "Did you ask why?" Lyric hesitated. "No, sir." He turned slightly. "Why not?" She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Because I already know why." Renfield studied her, long, deep, too perceptive. Then, as if confirming something, he nodded once. He walked back inside, his steps measured. He didn't need force. His presence alone bent the room. He picked up the radio handset. "All stations," he said, his voice calm and unmistakably final. "This is Admiral Renfield. I am assuming operational authority over Exercise Sentinel Forge, effective immediately." The room froze. Lyric felt her heart kick hard against her ribs, not fear, not hope, but something between them. A suspended moment where her future tilted on an edge she didn't control. And she knew, before he said the next words, that whatever happened now would change everything. What did he see in her that everyone else refused to? Renfield's presence filled the command tower like pressure before a storm. Officers lined up with backs stiff, eyes forward, waiting for a verdict none of them expected when they woke up that morning. Lyric stood near the far window, feeling the weight of it all pressing against her ribs. She didn't move, didn't breathe too deeply, didn't let her face show the thin thread of fear winding through her. Renfield lowered the radio handset with a quiet click and turned toward the 3 officers summoned moments earlier. Colonel Kellerman, Major Talmadge, Lieutenant Colonel Ferris. They looked like men waiting for a sentence. Explain, Renfield said, why Captain Castleton was removed from the flight roster. Silence stretched. Kellerman swallowed. Sir, it was a command decision based on operational security concerns. Renfield's gaze didn't shift. What concerns? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, Kellerman replied, his voice tightening. You're not at liberty, Renfield repeated, the words soft but edged. Colonel, for the last 18 months I've had oversight of every classified operation run through this base. If there were security concerns about Captain Castleton, I would know. So I'll ask again, what concerns? The room felt like it leaned in. Again silence. Ferris cleared his throat. Sir, the concern was that Captain Castleton's presence today might raise questions we're not prepared to answer. Renfield's eyes sharpened. Questions about what? Ferris hesitated. About her recent operational history. Lyric felt something cold coil in her stomach. They weren't lying. Not really. They just weren't saying the part that mattered, that her silence had been ordered and then weaponized. Renfield turned toward her. Captain, have you been informed of any restrictions on your flight status? No, sir. Have you been notified of any pending investigations? No, sir. Are you currently qualified to fly the Ah-64 Apache? Yes, sir. Renfield turned back to the officers. Colonel, unless you provide documented evidence of a legitimate safety concern in the next 60 seconds, Captain Castleton will be reinstated. Kellerman's jaw clenched. Talmadge stared at the floor. Ferris looked like he wished he were anywhere else. The seconds ticked. No one moved. Lyric's heart was steady, but her hands curled into fists at her sides. Not in anger, in something closer to grief. Grief for the months of rumors, for the pilots who avoided her, for all the unspoken accusations she'd pretended not to hear. Renfield didn't wait for zero. He lifted the handset again. Captain Castleton. His voice echoed across every radio on the base, front and center. The airfield went silent. Lyric felt the entire base turn toward her. Every pilot, every crew chief, every technician, everyone who had whispered guessed, judged. And in that silence, the shame she had carried for months, the doubt, the rumors, the bruised pride, twisted into something else. A steadiness she hadn't felt in a long time. She descended the tower stairs alone, boots tapping against metal. The heat rose off the tarmac in shimmering waves. 40 pilots lined the flight line, forming an aisle she walked through like a soldier on trial or a soldier returning from one. Renfield stood waiting. The moment she stopped in front of him, he keyed the radio, switching to the base-wide channel. 14 weeks ago, he began, Captain Castleton flew a classified interdiction mission in the Qatar Basin. A ripple passed through the line of pilots. No aerial support, no comms, hostile territory, complete blackout. The silence deepened, every breath on base held hostage. Her helicopter took sustained fire from 3 positions, anti-aircraft, small arms RPGs. She neutralized all threats, extracted a pinned reconnaissance team, and returned with critical damage to both engines and only 11% fuel remaining. Someone behind her whispered, "Holy hell." Renfield continued. The mission was deemed too sensitive to acknowledge. Her record was scrubbed. She was ordered to say nothing. No medal, no commendation, no public record. He paused, letting the truth sink in like slow-rolling thunder. She flew the classified run. 5 words that cracked the entire narrative built around her. Lyric kept her gaze forward, but she felt the shift around her, respect replacing suspicion, realization replacing rumor. Sable Oaks took a step back, guilt washing over her face. Decker's expression hardened into vindication. Lyric didn't look at any of them. Renfield stepped closer, lowering his voice just for her. You were grounded because your presence would raise questions. They buried a mission, and in doing so, buried you. Her throat tightened, not from anger, from the strange, painful relief of finally being seen. Renfield raised his voice again. "Captain Castelain, get in the cockpit." Kellerman's voice burst over the radio, panicked. "Sir, the mission is still classified." Renfield cut him off. "She is the most qualified pilot on this base. Unless you want to explain to NATO observers why we benched her in favor of someone who didn't pressurize a hydraulic system, she flies." Sable turned toward her, helmet in hand, eyes wide. "Ma'am, I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," Lyric replied softly. Sable swallowed. "I'm sorry." "Don't be, you would have managed." Lyric took the helmet, the familiar weight grounding her. She approached the Apache, her Apache, with the reverence of someone greeting an old friend left waiting too long. Inside the cockpit, everything fit around her like memory, like muscle, like home. Decker climbed the ladder to help with the harness. "I heard what the Admiral said," he murmured. "It's still classified." "Not anymore, it is." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. Her hands moved quickly across the controls, running pre-flight at a pace that looked reckless to someone untrained, but it wasn't reckless. It was instinct, the kind of instinct forged in nights where one wrong switch could end lives. Within 30 seconds she found the hydraulic issue and corrected it with 3 steady adjustments. Decker verified, nodded, gave a thumbs up. Renfield's voice filled her headset. "Apache 61, you are cleared for engine start." She exhaled slowly. 61 copies, engine start." The turbine spooled. The rotors began to turn. The air around her shifted from heavy to alive. Outside, every pilot watched her, not because she had something to prove, but because she already had. The Apache vibrated through her bones, a living thing waking under her hands. "Tower 61, pre-flight complete, request departure clearance." "Apache 61, you are cleared." Lyric eased the collective, and the ground fell away beneath her. The Apache lifted smooth, steady, controlled. She banked into the crosswind, sunlight cutting through the canopy. The desert stretched out like a battlefield gone quiet. Behind her the base shrank. Ahead of her the exercise range waited. But inside her, something unexpected happened. Not pride. Not vindication. Something quieter, almost painful. A sense of reclaiming herself. She wasn't flying to prove them wrong. She was flying because despite everything they'd done to her, she still belonged in the sky. How do you fly when the world finally stops doubting you? Lyric held the cyclic with the steadiness of someone returning to a place she'd been exiled from. The Apache cut through the desert air, rotors thundering a rhythm she felt deep in her bones. Below her, the range stretched in broken lines of sand, rock, and distant target markers shimmering under the harsh midday light. But she didn't rush. She didn't surge into action to impress anyone watching. She let the machine breathe, let herself settle into the long-forgotten ease she'd once taken for granted. The voice in her headset was familiar and steady. "Range control to Apache 61. Exercise parameters unchanged. Begin on your cue." She didn't answer immediately. A part of her wanted to say, "You benched me an hour ago. Now you want perfection." Another part whispered something else, quieter, worn thin. "Prove nothing, just fly." She let out a slow breath. 61 copies, she said, beginning run. The Apache rolled into a clean, sharp turn, dipping low toward the first range segment. Her shadow skimmed across the earth like a blade. Dust plumes curled behind her as she accelerated. This wasn't combat, but her body responded as if it were. Her heartbeat slowed, her field of vision tightened. The world sharpened into angles and movement, threats real or simulated. Every vibration of the rotor told her something. Every note of the engine carried meaning. The first target appeared at the edge of the ridge. A simulated SAM site, painted metal, static, but Lyric saw it as she'd seen the real 1 month ago, half-hidden, unexpected, alive with intent. She adjusted altitude, lined up the shot. 61, engaging target 1. Her thumb pressed the trigger. The cannon barked. A line of fire tore across the sand, each round landing exactly where she wanted it. Dust erupted. Smoke markers flared. She didn't smile. She didn't feel triumphant. It felt more like exhaling. The second target came fast, a convoy formation, moving targets meant to mimic hostile vehicles. Lyric dipped lower still, the Apache hugging terrain that offered no margin for error. She felt the blades strain slightly in the hot air, the machine reacting to her control, trusting her judgment. Her hands worked automatically. Adjust, fire. 3 bursts, 3 hits. Noise crackled through the radio. Someone on the tower forgetting to mute their mic in sheer disbelief. She's flying that thing like it's part of her. They cut off abruptly, embarrassed. Lyric didn't react, not outwardly. But inside, she felt something tug loose, a knot she'd carried under her ribs for far too long. She wasn't trying to prove them wrong. She was trying to remind herself she was still whole. The third run was the hardest, the agility demonstration. High speed, low altitude, precision maneuvers executed under simulated fire. It demanded instincts honed by fear and discipline. It demanded the part of her she tried to bury after Qatar Basin, the part that woke her at night with phantom rotor noise and the memory of tracers climbing toward her like reaching hands. The range officer announced, 61, begin on your mark. She didn't wait. She just moved. The Apache surged forward. She banked into a turn so tight she felt the pressure clamp around her ribs. The horizon blurred. Dust spiraled in her wake. She angled through the canyon cut, rotors clearing rock by mere feet. A pilot watching from the tower muttered, "She's running combat maneuvers, full combat." Another answered, "Because that's how she flies. She doesn't know how to hold back." They weren't wrong. Lyric dove through the narrowest point of the canyon, the Apache tilting with frightening smoothness. The simulated AA guns opened, electronically, but the scream of the warning tones still triggered muscle memory she couldn't shake. In Qatar, the tones weren't warnings, they were countdowns. Her jaw tightened. She rolled left, dropped altitude, skimmed the canyon floor, then rose sharply, firing a burst so precise it looked choreographed. She threaded between 2 mock AA towers, barely missing their metal edges. Her breathing remained controlled, even, but when she cleared the last ridge, something inside her eased, the kind of easing that only came after proving you could still do the thing that once nearly killed you. She clicked into the radio. 61, run complete. The silence on the other end lasted 2 breaths too long. Then applause erupted through the headset, not protocol, not ordered, but unmistakably real. Observers, foreign officers, Pentagon analysts, and pilots who finally realized what had been buried beneath classification and silence. Renfield's voice cut clean through the noise. "Good work, Captain." It wasn't praise. It wasn't flattery. It was acknowledgement, a simple, rare truth spoken by a man who did not bother with unnecessary words. Lyric brought the Apache around for landing. The base came back into view, the flight line packed, bodies lined up, still watching. Her shadow touched the tarmac before her landing gear did. She set the bird down with the same precision she had flown with. The rotor slowed. The engine wound down. The hum sank into quiet. When she lifted the canopy and climbed out, no one cheered. They didn't need to. Pilots stood in 2 rows, a silent corridor the same way she had walked before, except now the air wasn't heavy with judgment. It was heavy with something else. Respect maybe, or regret, or both. Sable Oaks approached first. Ma'am, her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. Lyric shook her head softly. Don't apologize for following orders. You should have been flying from the start. Lyric didn't answer, not because she disagreed, but because saying it aloud wouldn't help either of them. Decker stood beside the Apache, arms crossed. When she approached, he spoke quietly. Knew the whispers were garbage. You don't talk to your aircraft the way you do unless you've been through hell in one. She looked at him surprised. You notice that? Ma'am, ground crews notice everything, especially the ones that come back with scars. Scars. The word landed deeper than it should have. Renfield appeared then, stepping out from the tower, his face unreadable. Captain, walk with me. They moved toward the far edge of the tarmac, the noise of the base fatting behind them. Lyric could feel her pulse in her fingertips, not adrenaline, not fatigue, but something more fragile. Renfield stopped under the shadow of a hangar. You know what happens next? He asked. Yes, sir, she said quietly. A review, maybe an investigation, questions about why my record was sealed. Correct, he studied her not unkindly. Are you afraid? She didn't answer immediately. Fear wasn't something soldiers admitted easily, even to themselves, especially not soldiers who had spent months pretending not to break. I'm not afraid of the investigation, sir, she said. I'm afraid of what it might cost. And what do you think that is? My career, my credibility, what little trust I have left. Renfield nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. You've already paid more than most, he said, but you didn't break, that matters. She looked out toward the runway. Heat shimmered upward, blurring the horizon. For a moment she didn't feel strong or vindicated. She felt tired, worn, human. Renfield's tone softened. Captain, what they did to you was wrong, and it won't stand. Lyric swallowed. Sir, why did you come today, really? His jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, with memory. Because I was at the Qatar debrief, he said quietly. I saw the gun camera footage. I read the after-action reports others tried to bury. I know what it cost you to stay silent. Her breath caught. Not because he said it, but because he believed it. He turned toward the tower. There's an inquiry tomorrow morning. I'll be there. You won't face it alone. Lyric blinked hard, steadying herself. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the moment she realized she wasn't fighting it alone anymore. Why did the silence before an inquiry feel heavier than gunfire? Lyric sat alone in the small, windowless briefing room, the overhead lights humming faintly. A single metal chair, a plain table, a recorder she wasn't allowed to touch. The military had a way of making even neutral spaces feel accusatory. She rested her hands on her thighs to stop them from tightening into fists. She wasn't afraid of being questioned. She'd faced armed combatants in the dark, rotor blades barely turning, fuel bleeding out of a tank that shouldn't have held together. Men with rifles were easy to understand. It was the quiet men in uniforms, the ones who hid behind protocol, that kept her stomach tight. A knock sounded once, the door opened. Colonel Hendricks from JAG walked in first, tall, restrained, a legal mind sharpened to a razor's edge. Marcus Webb from the Secretary of Defense office followed, carrying a binder thick with sealed documents. Renfield came last, his presence grounding the room like an anchor dropped in a storm. Captain Castellane, Hendricks said, taking a seat opposite her, thank you for your patience. The inquiry will be informal but recorded. You may pause to collect your thoughts at any time. Lyric nodded, keeping her breathing even. She could feel Renfield's gaze from her right, not intrusive, just there, a silent reassurance she hadn't had in months. Let's begin, Hendricks said, pressing the record button. Questions started gently. Dates, times, protocol adherence. She answered each with clarity, her voice steady. She stuck to facts, not emotion, not interpretation, just truth. But then the questions shifted, angled, probing. testing the integrity of her story. Why didn't you report the engine failure immediately upon landing during the Qatar mission? Because we were under blackout protocol, sir, and because the recon team's medic was unconscious. Stabilizing him came first. Did you question the blackout order? No, sir. Do you believe the order was appropriate? Lyric hesitated. This was the danger zone. Speak too plainly, and she risked implying criticism of command. Hold back too much, and she would look evasive. Renfield's voice cut in, smooth and controlled. Colonel, Captain Castelaine had no situational awareness of broader operational intelligence at the time. She executed her orders lawfully. Let's avoid asking her to evaluate decisions she had no authority over. Hendricks nodded slightly, recalibrating. Very well. Captain, did you at any point disobey a direct order during the operation? No, sir. Did you communicate any classified details after returning to base? No, sir. Have you been approached by anyone requesting that you alter or omit elements of your debrief? Lyric's jaw tightened. The memory rose a dim room, a senior intel officer with polite eyes and a rehearsed tone. You will say nothing of what happened, not the damage, not the casualties, not the extraction. This mission never existed. She kept her expression still. Yes, sir. I was instructed to maintain full silence due to classification concerns. Webb leaned forward. Captain, do you believe those concerns were justified? Another trap, another tightrope. She drew in a slow breath. Sir, I believe security protocols exist to protect lives and strategic objectives. I don't always understand them, but I follow them. Webb studied her for a moment, tapping a finger against his binder. Off the record, Captain, your mission was extraordinary. Losing the record wasn't your failure. It was an institutional one. Lyric felt something loosen in her chest at the words. A small, unexpected fracture in the wall she'd built around herself. Renfield's voice remained calm. Let the record show that Captain Castelaine has complied fully with all classification protocols and has shown no evidence of misconduct. Hendricks closed her folder. Very well, we will recess for review. When the officers stepped out, the room fell into a strange, still quiet. Lyric rested her elbows on the table and lowered her head, closing her eyes for a moment. The fluorescent light pressed against her eyelids. She wasn't tired from flying. She was tired from being invisible for so long. Renfield remained behind, leaning against the far wall. He waited until she opened her eyes. You did well, he said. I only told the truth. Truth delivered cleanly takes discipline. He paused. You were disciplined. The words shouldn't have meant so much, but they did. She swallowed. Sir, can I ask something you don't have to answer? Renfield raised an eyebrow. You may ask. Why me? She said quietly. Why put your rank on the line for someone you don't even know? Renfield considered her for a long moment before answering. Because your silence cost you more than it protected, and because people like Kellerman rely on that silence to stay comfortable. She met his eyes. And what's the cost to you? Renfield exhaled through his nose, not irritation, something like resignation. I've spent a career watching good soldiers get buried under politics, he said. Most stayed quiet. You didn't break. That matters to me more than you realize. Lyric looked down at her hands, hands calloused from controls, from training, from holding on too tightly to things she had no choice but to carry alone. Thank you, sir, she whispered. You earned today, he replied, turning toward the door. The question now is whether you're ready for what comes after. Before she could ask what he meant, the door opened again. Hendricks and Webb returned, both holding fresh documents. Captain Castelaine, Hendricks said, taking her seat, we have reviewed all testimony and documentation. Lyric sat straighter. There is no evidence of misconduct or procedural violations, Hendricks continued. You followed lawful orders and adhered to all classified protocol requirements. Your actions in Qatar were correct, necessary, and exemplary. Her breath caught, not loud, but enough that she felt something tremble inside her. Webb spoke next. Captain, under normal circumstances, you would have received formal commendations for Qatar. Due to classification, they will not be public, but your record will be updated. Your flight status remains unrestricted. Lyric blinked once. The words blurred for a second before they sharpened again. Unrestricted. The word was heavier than it sounded. Hendricks closed her folder. Captain, is there anything you wish to add for the record? Lyric shook her head. No, ma'am. Webb gathered his documents. Then this inquiry is closed. You're free to return to duty. They stood. Renfield waited for her to rise before he did. She followed him out of the room, her body feeling strangely light and heavy at the same time. When the hallway door shut behind them, the noise of the base washed in: engines, footsteps, radio chatter, voices. Life moving forward. Renfield glanced at her, the faintest edge of something like approval in his eyes. You didn't just clear your name, he said. You reclaimed it. Lyric wasn't sure if she believed him yet. But for the first time in months, she wanted to. They walked out into the desert sunlight together. The world looked the same, but something in her had shifted. She wasn't done. She wasn't finished. She was finally being allowed to rise. Why did coming home feel harder than walking into fire? 3 days after the inquiry, Lyric stood at the edge of the airfield, watching the line of young Apache trainees gather near Hangar 2. The sun was dropping, throwing long shadows across the tarmac. The desert heat had softened, replaced by the dry chill that crept in when the sun slipped behind the mountains. She should have felt triumphant, vindicated, restored. Instead, she felt something quieter, heavier, as if the truth that had saved her had also revealed how much she'd lost while everyone else kept talking. Renfield had insisted she take time before returning to full ops. She refused. She didn't need time. She needed purpose. She needed to be in the cockpit, where the world made sense, where protocols and instincts and muscle memory drowned out the whispers she still heard in her sleep. So when she was assigned to help run combat simulations for the new pilots, she accepted without complaint. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't high stakes, but it kept her tethered to the one thing that never betrayed her, the machine she understood better than she understood most people. The trainees gathered around her, nervous but eager. Fresh uniforms, fresh dreams, eyes bright with the kind of hope she used to have. Cisco Morales, youngest in the group, energetic to the point of annoyance, stepped forward. Ma'am, can I ask something? Lyric nodded, keeping her posture relaxed so she didn't intimidate them more than she already did by simply existing. How do you handle the pressure? Cisco asked. Up there, I mean, when everything matters. The others leaned in, waiting, hopping, expecting some hardened, cinematic piece of wisdom. Lyric thought back to Qatar, to the explosions, the failing engines, the shuddering rotor, to the moments she genuinely believed she wouldn't make it back, to the silence afterward, the secrecy, the sudden scrutiny, the crushing isolation. Pressure wasn't something she conquered. It was something she carried. You don't handle it by being perfect, she said softly. You handle it by being prepared, by training until your responses come without thinking, by accepting you will make mistakes and learning from them without letting them define you. Cisco nodded quickly, absorbing every word. Lyric continued, this machine is powerful, but it's just metal and fuel. What makes it effective, what keeps it alive, is the person in the cockpit, and that person doesn't need to be fearless. They just need to stay committed to the mission, to their crew, to getting home. The group remained silent, taking in her words. She didn't tell them the part she carried quietly. that sometimes the hardest mission was coming home at all. After the trainees dispersed, she found herself wandering toward the old briefing room, the one where Kellerman announced her removal, the one where the whispers began. The air inside was still. The roster board hung cold on the wall. Her name was there again. Castellane, lead pilot. Her chest tightened, a quiet ache running beneath her sternum. Not pain, not pride, something in between. Long time coming. Lyric turned. Sable Oak stood in the doorway, her posture hesitant. She was in flight gear, helmet under her arm, but she looked younger than Lyric remembered, as if guilt had carved away some of her confidence. "You deserve it," Sable said. Lyric nodded. "You flew well today." "That doesn't make up for." "It wasn't your fault." Lyric's voice stayed firm. "You followed orders, we all do." Sable stepped further in, her expression pained. Did what happened change how you see the rest of us?" Lyric didn't answer immediately. What was she supposed to say? Yes. No. That she resented none of them, but still felt the sting of being surrounded by people who stayed silent. That she didn't blame them, but also couldn't forget the emptiness she felt every time she walked into a room and saw eyes turn away. She chose the most honest version she could give. "It made me realize how much we never know about the people standing next to us," she said quietly. "How many carry things we can't see? Silence doesn't mean guilt, and absence of explanation doesn't mean absence of reason." Sable swallowed, nodding, her gaze dropping to the floor. "For what it's worth, I'm glad the truth came out." Lyric didn't say me too. She wasn't sure she fully believed it yet. That night she returned to her quarters. The hallway was quiet, lights dimmed. A small box sat outside her door, no name, no note. Just a black package with a single strip of crimson tape. Her pulse jumped. She took it inside, placed it on the table, and opened it. Inside was a patch, black background, silver Apache silhouette stitched in clean, deliberate lines. Beneath it, in crimson thread, Qatar Basin Shadow Flight. Classified. She inhaled sharply. Someone new. Someone who wasn't supposed to acknowledge a single detail of that mission. Someone who wanted her to have, what? Proof. Recognition. A reminder that she wasn't alone in that silence. Her fingers brushed the patch. The thread felt rough, real, grounding. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of it settle. A memory rose without warning. Night sky, blacker than ink, rotor wash throwing sand in violent spirals, engines screaming. A voice crackling through a dying radio, "We're pinned if you don't." The blast, the surge of heat, the moment she thought the rotors would shear off, the way she gripped the controls so hard her knuckles tore. The silence afterward, the crushing, suffocating silence, not because the danger had passed, but because she had no one to speak to about what she had just survived. Her breath trembled. She placed the patch on her desk gently, as if she were afraid it might burn her fingers. She stared at it, her throat tightening with something she didn't want to name. Recognition shouldn't have mattered. But it did. It always did. A knock sounded at the door. Lyric wiped her eyes quickly, though she knew there was little emotion to hide, and opened it. Renfield stood there, hands clasped behind him, expression unreadable. "May I come in?" "Yes, sir." He stepped inside, his eyes briefly landing on the patch before returning to her face. "Someone wanted you to have that," he said. "Someone who shouldn't have. Someone who knows what it means." She inhaled. "Why now?" "Because truth has a way of finding its way to the people strong enough to hold it." He paused. "And because your story didn't end with the inquiry. You know that." Lyric looked down at the patch again. "Sir, I'm tired." Renfield nodded. "That's the cost of silent battles, the ones no one meddles you for." She met his gaze, something sharp and vulnerable twisting inside her. "What happens now?" "That," he said softly, Depends on whether you're ready to stop surviving and start living again. He stepped back toward the door. Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow, the real rebuilding begins. The door closed behind him. Lyric stood alone in the quiet room, staring at the patch, at the symbol of a mission no one was supposed to remember, at the weight of the life she'd carried alone, at the truth that had finally surfaced. She wasn't healed, she wasn't whole. Not yet. But for the first time, she felt the smallest pull toward something she hadn't felt in months. Not pride. Not vindication. Something gentler. Hope. Why did the quiet moments after redemption often feel heavier than the fall itself? The next morning began before sunrise, the air still cool enough to breathe without feeling the burn of desert heat. Lyric walked toward the hangars in fatigues, her steps soft, the base still half asleep. A faint orange glow stretched across the horizon, the kind of dawn that whispered rather than announced itself. She didn't know why she'd woken up early. Habit, maybe, or the restless tug in her chest that hadn't eased, even after the inquiry cleared her name. People expected relief after vindication, but truth had a strange way of leaving space where silence used to be, space that forced you to confront everything you'd buried just to keep moving. A figure waited near Hangar 5. Renfield. He stood with his hands clasped behind him, eyes on the rising sun, posture calm in a way only decades of storms could teach. When he heard her steps, he turned slightly. "You're early," he said. "So are you." He gave a small, knowing nod. "You didn't sleep much." She didn't bother pretending. "No, sir." Renfield began walking, and she matched his pace. "There's something you need to understand," he said quietly. "Clearing your record doesn't erase what you went through. It doesn't make the whispers less painful. It doesn't undo the months you carried your reputation alone." Lyric kept her eyes forward. "I know." "Do you?" Renfield asked. "Most soldiers think truth will restore everything, but truth isn't a salve, it's a reckoning." She didn't speak. Part of her didn't want to acknowledge the weight inside her chest, the ache she couldn't categorize, not anger, not grief, but some blend of both. Renfield stopped near the shadow of the hangar, turning to face her fully. "You've earned more than your rank back, Captain. You've earned room to feel what they cost you." Her breath hitched, barely audible. She hated how easily he read her, how simply he saw beneath the calm exterior she'd spent years building. But she didn't look away. She spent too long hiding. Renfield continued. "The mind remembers silence as much as it remembers sound. You fought alone, and that leaves a mark." Lyric's jaw tightened. "I don't want to be defined by what happened." "You aren't," he said gently. "You're defined by how you rose from it." They walked again, the desert morning stretching around them in soft blues and pale golds. A maintenance crew rolled out equipment. Engines hummed faintly from distant prepping aircraft. The world resumed its rhythm. But Lyric's rhythm was still finding itself. As they neared the flight line, a group of pilots turned at the sight of her. Their conversation stopped, but this time the silence wasn't avoidance. It was respect, honor, even remorse. One pilot stepped forward, a tall, quiet major she barely knew. "Captain," he said, his voice steady, "for what it's worth, I'm sorry we didn't ask. We should have asked." Lyric studied him for a heartbeat. The younger version of herself would have said something polite, deflecting, protecting them from discomfort. But she wasn't that person anymore. "It hurt," she said simply. "Not the reassignment, not the rumors, the silence." He nodded, eyes lowering. "We'll do better." She believed him, not because he said it, but because the air around him had changed. The base had shifted in ways she hadn't expected, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. Renfield glanced toward the horizon. "Walk with me one more time." They moved past the flight line, leaving behind the hum of machinery and the thick tension of the airfield. Beyond the hangars, past the last fenced boundary, the desert opened in vast, quiet waves of sand, the kind of expanse that forced introspection. Renfield stopped at the ridge where the view widened. "This career," he said, "will take pieces from you. Some you offer freely, some it steals, but you decide what you rebuild with." Lyric watched the horizon, the sun rising slow and relentless. "And what if I don't know where to start?" "You already did," he answered. "You told the truth." She didn't respond, not right away. Because the truth she'd spoken in the inquiry wasn't the hardest truth she carried. The hardest truth was that she hadn't broken during the mission. She'd broken afterward, in the silence, in the shadows, in the loneliness that came with knowing something extraordinary, something terrible, and not being allowed to speak of it. She swallowed, the dryness of the morning air catching in her throat. "Sir, what if I'm not the same pilot I was before Qatar?" Renfield looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him, something like empathy, tempered by understanding. "No one survives fire unchanged," he said, "but change doesn't diminish you, it refines you." Her eyes burned, but she blinked it back. "Not weakness. Release." He continued softly. "What you did didn't make you legendary, it made you responsible, and responsibility is heavier than glory." A small, shaken breath left her. He wasn't wrong. The weight she carried wasn't the mission. It was the silence afterward. Renfield stepped a little closer. "Lyric, you are not defined by the months they doubted you. You are defined by your refusal to doubt yourself when no one else would stand with you." She exhaled slowly. "I didn't refuse, I just endured." "Endurance," Renfield said, "is its own kind of courage." A long quiet settled between them, not uncomfortable, not strained, just human. When they finally walked back toward the base, Lyric felt something shift in her chest, a loosening, a small but real liberation from the weight she'd carried alone. As she neared the flight line again, Decker jogged up to her, slightly out of breath. "Ma'am, your bird is ready for inspection," he said. "Kellerman wanted to oversee it, but the Admiral told him to stand down." Lyric glanced at Renfield. He gave a subtle smirk, not unkind, just satisfied. She approached her Apache, the machine that had saved her even as it nearly broke beneath her, and placed a hand on its metal skin. Warm, familiar, alive with history she could finally acknowledge. Sable Oaks approached tentatively. "Captain, we're running tandem drills this afternoon. I'd be honored if you took lead." Lyric nodded. "I will." She climbed into the cockpit, the harness clicking into place with a sound that felt almost like forgiveness. The seat embraced her shape, the controls waiting for her touch, the world narrowing to a horizon she could trust. When the rotors spun up and the ground blurred away, she felt it, the calm that came only in the sky, where expectation and judgment and whispered doubt couldn't follow. The Apache lifted higher. The desert spread beneath her. The horizon opened like a promise. For the first time since Qatar, Lyric felt whole. Not because the world had apologized. Not because her record was cleared. Not because anyone validated what she endured. But because she chose to rise again. And as she banked left, sunlight glinting across the canopy, she understood something she hadn't before, something she would carry with her long after the noise faded and the skis went quiet. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the truest form of strength is not the roar of victory, but the quiet of rising after being forgotten.